Hello everyone and welcome back to the History of Diving Museum. My name is Emily and today we are outside in the backside of the museum and we're going to talk a little bit about buoyancy instead of going into the history of diving so much, because buoyancy plays an important role with diving and underwater technologies and underwater habitats as well. So, first off, there are three different types of buoyancy. There is positive buoyancy, neutral buoyancy, and negative buoyancy. So, positive buoyancy is essentially when an object is lighter in weight than the water that's surrounding it. And that will cause the object to float rather than sink within it or remain in the water column. An example of that is our wonderful scuba duck, because, ducks float in the water, we all know that. So we're going to put him in the bin of water, and as we can see, he's just floating around doing his little duck stuff. Now, a negative buoyant object means it is denser and weighs more than the fluid that surrounds it. And an example of that is this little leaded weight. We're going to plop that in, and it is going to sink right down to the bottom. Now, if something's neutrally buoyant, that means that it'll stay nice and even within the water column itself. And I know a lot of people like the picture of the neutrally buoyant relaxed turtle, where the sea turtle's got his little fins crossed and he's floating in the water. That is neutral buoyance. And that is also what divers try to be, so they don't touch corals or other things that are on the bottom of the sea floor. It's a very important skill to have while you're diving. Now, another important part of buoyancy is underwater habitats. Because habitats, they don't want to necessarily float in the water, otherwise they'd be a boat. So they have to make sure that the habitat is weighted down. Sometimes it might even be attached to the bottom, and it can have different levels of ballast stone in it to help keep it underneath the water and at a certain depth. One of the most famous underwater habitats we have right here off of Key Largo is the Aquarius habitat. And it is used by scientists and researchers and even astronauts to study marine biology, the effects of being underwater on the body. All kinds of cool experiments are conducted there. And it is completely self-efficient, except they do have some cables that go up to the surface for Wi-Fi and electricity. So it's pretty neat. We also have Jules Undersea Lodge here in the Florida Keys, also in Key Largo, which is a underwater hotel. You can actually spend the night in it. It's about 25-30 feet underwater. You can even get pizza delivered to you while you're staying in it, which is pretty fun. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a little experiment. We're going to make our own underwater habitats, and we're going to see, do we want it to sink all the way to the bottom and be negative buoyant? Do we want it to be neutral buoyant and stay somewhere in the middle? Maybe if you were a scientist, you'd want to travel along the ocean currents following schools of fish or plankton. Or do you want your underwater habitat to not be underwater and you want it to be positive buoyant and floating at the surface? These are all things we're going to explore, and I'm going to include different materials and instructions how to do this activity while you're at home with your family, with your friends, and have a little fun with it. So let's get started.